as most of you know, in the last 10 years, in fact, since 2009, Israel has launched, three massive wars of aggression on the occupied Gaza Strip. And many civilians of our civilians here in Gaza were massacred by this indiscriminate bombing, which was condemned by UN experts and leading human rights organizations. And I'm talking about mainstream human rights organizations. I'm talking about the likes of Human Rights Watch. I'm talking about Amnesty International. I'm talking even about, B'Tselem, Israeli mainstream human rights organization, and all have condemned these three massive wars on Gaza as war crimes and, I'm quoting, possible crimes against humanity. And this is important for us because I'm talking from the perspective of also international law, and this is what I'm interested in here. And these assaults left over more than 3,800 Palestinians dead in Gaza. And I'm talking about 1.8% of the historic land of Palestine. And I'm sorry. And another 15,000 were injured. So Gaza has the population of Gaza is 2 million people. So 2 million Palestinians in the besieged Gaza Strip, the overwhelming majority of whom are refugees who were violently expelled and dispossessed from our homes by Zionist forces in 1948. And this is something that everybody knows. And in 2009, that was the first war. 2000, we were subjected to 3 weeks of a massive attack. In 2012 for 2 weeks, and in 2014 for 51 days of relentless Israeli state terror. That's what it is, whereby Israeli warplanes systematically targeted civilian areas, reduced whole neighborhoods. My neighborhood, Tal El Hawa, was reduced to rubble, complete rubble. Scores of schools were destroyed, including several schools run by UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Work Agency, where civilians were taking shelter. I myself took shelter at one of those schools, which was reduced to rubble. And here's the point, is that these wars came after years of an ongoing, crippling, deadly medieval siege that has been imposed on Gaza since 2007 until today. And I will address what the siege literally means for us here in Gaza. And it is literally, it's a severe form of collective punishment. It is collective, and it has been condemned by human rights organizations as a form of collective punishment. For example, the Red Crescent, the ICRC, made it absolutely clear that, for example, that Gaza civilian population is being punished for acts for which they bear no responsibility. And that makes it a form of collective punishment. Now, and if you remember, I want to take you back to the first war on Gaza in 2009. And that, in 2009 I was in Gaza, 2012 I was in Gaza, 2014 was in Gaza. And I will give you an idea about myself in a second, because I spent most of my time studying abroad, actually. I got my master's degree from, Cyprus, Eastern Mediterranean University. Then I got my PhD degree from University of Johannesburg in South Africa. And I worked in China, Abu Dhabi, Oman, etc., etc. But I decided to come back to Gaza in 2005 because my parents died in 2005, and I was not able, or rather I was not allowed to come back and attend their funeral. So I decided to come back after they died and work at Al-Aqsa University. So I attended these. I was here in 2009, I was here in 2012 and 2014. I'm still working at Al-Aqsa University. But I remember 2019, and I saw the South African judge, Richard Goldstone, who headed a UN fact-finding mission on the Gaza conflict at the time. And what they found at the time is that Israel was guilty of, and I'm quoting, I remember very well, war crimes and possible crimes against humanity, as did major international human rights organizations, as I said, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. The same scenario, and this is the point, I mean, the question that we raised at the time is that why would Israel carry out such a massive attack that resulted in the death of so many civilians? Because Israel knew that it could do that with full impunity. With full impunity. And this is exactly the reason why Israel decided in 2012 to repeat the same scenario. And a worse one in 2014, only because, and bluntly speaking, and I'm going to repeat myself, that, the Israeli government feels and knows that it can carry on its war crimes with full impunity. That is the only reason. And I'm going to address the similarities with South Africa when the apartheid regime decided to stop, and negotiate with the ANC, etc., to put an end to the apartheid, system in South Africa. But the point is that in addition to Israel's daily attacks and airstrikes, we suffer from, contamination of water. 97% of our water is undrinkable. 97% of our water is polluted. So we suffer from contamination of water, air, soil. Now, the water and the air and the soil are contaminated, because the sewage system is unable to function. And the reason that it is unable to function is due to power cuts. Now I'm talking to you, we have no electricity. We're using a generator. So due to power cuts, this is unable to function. And we have these regular power cuts because of lack of fuel to the main generators of the Gaza power station. Now, medical conditions, for example, medical conditions, terrible. I mean, the health infrastructure is almost destroyed due to, and the medical conditions are terrible due to injuries from internationally prohibited butterfly bullets. If you remember the Gaza Freedom March, where civilians were targeted by prohibited butterfly bullets. And by the way, and this has been reported by Israeli media. Talking about biased reporting. Israeli. I'm talking about Haaretz, Ahronot, Israeli media, and of course other illegal Israeli weapons. And those injuries were also caused from, as I said, water contamination, which cannot be treated. The water contamination cannot be treated because of the siege. So, in addition to the ban on building materials, in 2009, 2012, 2014, hundreds of buildings and factories were destroyed. By the way, including some buildings that belong to the university where I work, Al-Aqsa University, and the Islamic University. So Israel also prevents many other necessities from being important. Light bulbs, candles, matches, books. I mean, can you imagine that? Refrigerators, shoes, clothing, mattresses, sheets, blankets, tea, coffee, cigarettes, sausage, cows, pasta, pens, paper. Now, of course, they have eased, and that's why they allow some of the items that I have just mentioned. Add to this, to everything that I have mentioned just now, the drastic cuts endorsed by UNRWA after the announcement of the so-called deal of the century. So Palestinian refugees have been targeted, and therefore the American administration decided to impose cuts on UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Work Agency. And by the way, 2/3 of the population of Gaza are refugees. I myself, I am a refugee. My parents were refugees from the village of Zarnuga, which was ethnically cleansed in 1948. They died in 2005, dreaming of returning to the village in which they were born. Of course, not to mention, in addition to everything that I have mentioned, because, you know, I have to tell you the details, and I'm telling you, it pains me to keep, to keep repeating the same thing about Gaza. Since 2007, I have been saying almost the same thing, and things are getting worse. So in addition to the siege imposed by Gaza, we have the constant closure of the Rafah crossing, which is the only exit Gaza has to the external world, and it is controlled by the Egyptian authorities. So you have the Israelis, and you have also in cahoot with the Egyptians imposing this deadly siege, leading ultimately to one of the highest unemployment rates and poverty on the face of earth. So the conclusion that Gazans have reached is that, I mean, Gaza has been occupied since 1967. 2/3 of Gazans are refugees who are entitled to their right of return in accordance with United Nations Resolution 194. They were ethnically cleansed in 1948, and nothing has happened so far. So the conclusion that I'm just trying to express the general feeling here on the streets of Gaza. I was born in a refugee camp, the Nusayrat refugee camp. And the conclusion is that Israel is intent on destroying Gaza because official bodies and leaders choose to say and do absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Nothing has been done to stop Israel from carrying out what it has been, what has been doing to the Palestinians of Gaza. So, in spite, because some people claim that Israel has withdrawn, and it's not a withdrawal; it's redeployment of forces from the Gaza Strip. So, in spite of Israel's alleged unilateral withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in 2005. The fact is that it still maintains a permanent military presence in Gaza's territorial waters and controls the movement of people and goods into the Strip by land and water. You know, the Mediterranean, by land and water. And by the way, just to give you my personal experience, my sister lives in Bethlehem, in the West Bank, which is a one hour drive from Gaza. I have not been able to see her since 2000. I myself have not been allowed to visit the West Bank, Jerusalem, etc., since the early 90s. So Israel has been controlling, land and water, in addition to movement within the Strip through, targeting anyone entering the so-called no-go zone, designated, of course, by the Israeli military. Israel also continues to control Gaza's population registry. I mean, you imagine the population registry, according to the Oslo Accord, is controlled by Israel. Yet, in spite of all of these things, Israel claims that it is no longer the occupying power in the Gaza Strip and uses this excuse. In addition, of course, this excuse that it no longer controls the Gaza Strip. In addition, another excuse, the results of the 2006 democratic elections that took place in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, when people went to the polling stations and voted against the Oslo Accords, voted against the two-state solution, the facade of the two-state solution, which in fact is a form of Bantustanization of Palestine. And Israel used these two excuses to intensify its policy of siege and lethal attacks on Gaza's civilians. And now, as most of you know, Israel has decided to become openly an apartheid state. Openly an apartheid state by legalizing racial discrimination. And honestly, I personally, spending some time in South Africa, studying American literature, American politics, etc., I have tried very hard, very, very hard, to find out whether there are constitutions or laws in the world similar to Israel's new nation-state basic law. Israel's new nation-state basic law, which most of you know, of course, and it aims very clearly to establish a legal basis for Jewish supremacy and racism against indigenous Palestinians. That's it. That's it. Israel has no constitution. Israel has basic laws. And this basic law, the nation-state basic law, makes it absolutely clear that Israel is the state of Jews only. And as you noticed, something happened to our generator. I'm sorry about that. But I'm using battery of the laptop, and I'm sure you still can hear me. I need a sign whether you can hear me. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, we can still hear you. Great, keep talking.
Yeah, all right.
And see you.
Yeah. So, yeah, all right. So I was talking about the new basic law. And I have tried very hard to find any, similar laws, but I have failed. And including, the indigenous population has been targeted. We are not citizens of the state of Israel, even though we were born here, our parents were born here, etc., etc. Only South Africa under apartheid, and America in the eras, of course, the American South and the eras of slavery and segregation. And now in Gaza, in addition to everything that I have said, we have the epidemic, COVID-19, to deal with. So while many countries shut borders and enforce, closure, etc., etc., we thought that, because Gaza, is isolated, so we are safer from the coronavirus because nobody can come in, nobody can come out. But as it has been with so much of the rest of the world, COVID-19 found a way to enter Gaza. And as I said, I mean, the health infrastructure is almost destroyed. At the moment, we are finding it extremely difficult to deal with the existing, about more than between 2,000 and 300 cases of coronavirus. In fact, and I must say it, we are in deep trouble. Gaza, the reason is Gaza has only 40 intensive care unit beds, only 40, and I'm going to repeat this because the population is 2 million. Okay, thank God. Gaza has only 40 intensive care unit beds and 65 ventilators. Now, okay, and now the figures are important because we're talking about a population of 2 million. So 40 intensive care unit beds and 65 ventilators for a population of 2 million, which means that we have only 2 ICU intensive care beds per 100,000. So you can imagine the situation. So, and as I explained, Gaza's healthcare system, was collapsing even before the pandemic. Its stocks of essential drugs are chronically low. Since 2007 have been so low. It's, of course, Gaza's natural sources, as I said, of drinkable water are largely contaminated. Electrical system provides sporadic, as you noticed, sporadic power. Deep poverty amid a appalling socioeconomic condition that is prevalent throughout the Gaza Strip. And as if 12 years of blockade interrupted by these 3 wars that I have just mentioned is not enough, and never, that's my knowledge, never before has a population been denied. And I've talked to South African comrades, ANC leaders, activists, whether they ever experienced something like this. And honestly, I've come to the conclusion that never has a population been denied the basic requirements for survival as a deliberate policy of colonization, occupation, and apartheid. We are talking about a multi-tiered, multi-formed system of oppression that has been imposed on Palestinians. The worst form of oppression is what we are experiencing here in Gaza. But this is what Israel is doing to us. 2 million people live without a secure supply of water, food, electricity, medicines, with almost half of them being children under the age of 15. Almost half of us are under the age of 15. It's tough. It's very, very tough. So the question, this is the situation in Gaza. I've tried to summarize. The question now is what to do. What do we expect? People who support us, people who support, justice. I'm not saying who support Palestine, who support justice. Decent human beings support justice the same way you supported the anti-apartheid movement, the anti-apartheid struggle. And honestly, I think, you cannot talk about, 2 parties here. There is no symmetry. There is no symmetry whatsoever. And therefore, the outside world has to intervene. The outside has to intervene. No way out. And hence our call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. I told you, I spent some time in South Africa, and we had some South African activists and politicians visiting us here in Palestine. And no wonder then that, leading anti-apartheid activists, I'm talking about the likes of, the late Ahmed Kathra, even Nelson Mandela, by the way. Nelson Mandela, 1996, before the siege, because he visited Gaza. And he had very nice things to say to us. The likes of, the late comrade Kathrada, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Ronnie Castles. I'm talking about leading anti-apartheid figures, believe that what Israel is doing to us, the Palestinians, and I'm quoting Ronnie Castles. He said, far, far worse than what was done to Black South Africans under the heydays of apartheid. Even former, the American President Jimmy Carter, and I saw him when he visited us here in Gaza. It was, I think, 2007, 2008. On his visit to Gaza, he stated clearly, very, very clearly, that the Palestinian people trapped in Gaza, he said at the time, and I'm quoting, I remember very well, he said, are being treated like animals. And so the conclusion now, again, that, our conclusion is that our fight has, to be focused on popular resistance. Similar to what the South Africans did, similar to our, first Intifada, the Palestinian Intifada. So we decided to focus on popular resistance, and that's why we started the Great March of Return, for example. And you remember what happened. And this, this form of popular resistance can only pose a challenge to Israel's system of occupation, colonization, and apartheid, only if it is accompanied by a global campaign of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS. In South Africa, Mandela, of course, was arrested in 1964, the year I was born. And I remember South Africans were talking about the 4 pillars of struggle. 4 pillars of struggle, the first of which was, the armed struggle, then, the political underground. But in the mid-80s, until Mandela was released, they decided to follow popular resistance, make the townships, as they said, and I'm quoting, ungovernable, and a global BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, led by the anti-apartheid movement from London, where you are right now. And this is why what we want, we need ordinary citizens, such as yourselves, ordinary citizens of the world, to show Benjamin Netanyahu, to show the right-wing government of Israel that we have a common humanity. As simple as that. That we share a common humanity, that that you are watching what it is doing to us, and you will not tolerate it. The same way you did not tolerate the blatant racism of the inhumane system of South Africa, in spite of the support the apartheid system got from the likes of Margaret Thatcher, who considered Nelson Mandela a terrorist. The ANC, Nelson Mandela was on the terrorist list in the United States of America. Ronald Reagan in 1986, as late as 1986, considered Mandela a terrorist. And then what happened? In 1990, Mandela was released. So we want, we studied the South African experience and we've learned our lessons. I'm not talking about, copy and paste. Of course, there are differences. There are huge differences, but there are similarities. And we want people such as yourselves to Israel, that there is no place for the kind of warmongering and barbarism in this world that the people of the world, including yourselves, should not tolerate, that you reject it. And this is exactly what led the global anti-apartheid, as I said, so excuse me, the logic that led the anti-apartheid struggle, and that managed, to mobilize people around the world in the 70s and 80s of last century, until the apartheid system crumbled. And now we have South Africa for all South Africans. The land of South Africa belongs to all South Africans, regardless of race, regardless of religion, regardless of ethnicity. This is the 21st century. And then we think it is time to stand up to the only remaining apartheid system in the world. For that, I think we need to be united. And just in case, and let me explain, because I will look at the questions quickly. You will summarize the questions, but I know that some people keep asking me, what is BDS? BDS here in Palestine is a civil society initiative, and it has almost an overwhelming support from almost all Palestinian civil society sectors, and it is a decision taken by all of us: academics, students, workers, men, women, etc., that we want to tell the international community that has to intervene, and that we are fighting on behalf of the international community to implement, the rule of law. Namely, we're very clear. We are fighting for the implementation of United Nations Resolution 194, which calls for the right of return of Palestinian refugees to the towns and villages from which we were ethnically cleansed in 1948. We want the withdrawal of Israeli troops from the Gaza Strip and West Bank and Jerusalem, in accordance with the United Nations Resolution 242. And we want an end to Israel's apartheid system in 1948 against its own second-class Palestinian citizens. The only window of hope is BDS for us. And this is why, my message, and this is the last thing I'm saying, is, if you support Palestine, if you support, basic human rights, we are fighting for basic human rights, is that you need to promote a culture of boycott, similar to the one most of you led against the inhumane system of South Africa. Thank you so much. And I'm prepared now, and I'm ready to answer the questions.
Thank you very much. That's wow, it's always hard to hear, but we understand. We definitely definitely listening. I think one thing I'd like to pick up on is BDS. One of the questions from Jenny Tong. Many of us understand the appalling conditions you lie under and the injustice to all Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. Our government here recognizes it and accepts in replies to constant questioning that Israel's actions are contrary to international law and human rights. Nevertheless, apart for urging Israel to change policies, it does absolutely nothing. Anyone who criticizes Israel is accused of anti-Semitism, and the BDS movement is advised against by the government. Israel does whatever it likes with impunity. So this must be what you are seeing when you're talking about BDS, not just in the UK, but Canada, US, Australia. I mean, have you seen it, the message getting through that to the people?
Yeah. Look, I think this is an important question, and thank you for raising this issue. Right from the beginning, when we issued our statement, I am a member of PACB. PACB is the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, which we formed in 2004. Then the first call for BDS from Palestinian civil society came out in 2005. The international community to boycott Israel, that we oppose all forms of bigotry, all forms of racism, including anti-Semitism, including Islamophobia, including racism. We were absolutely clear about that. And our movement is enshrined in international law and the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. Now, we understand that Israel doesn't like that. And this is the reason why Israel started a campaign that is called, in Hebrew, they use the word chaspara. Chaspara is the Hebrew word for propaganda and public diplomacy. And if you look at the report about, the chaspara campaign, the first weapon that they want to use against BDS activists is accusation of anti-Semitism. And I think the experience of the Labour Party with Jeremy Corbyn is still alive in the United Kingdom. I had to address the same question also in South Africa, where there is also a strong Zionist lobby. The BDS movement is a secular movement that represents the overwhelming majority of Palestinian civil society sectors. And every single Palestinian civil society organization that has decided to join the BDS campaign has to sign on the first call issued in 2005 and make it absolutely clear that we are opposed to all forms of bigotry, and we specifically anti-Semitism in addition to Islamophobia.
I don't know. I think
sorry, I'm sorry, you're breaking up, and I thought was that the question, or because my internet connection is not good?
Yeah, no. Well, I thought what I might do is just check with Jenny Tong if she's got any further questions to follow up, because I'll probably let people ask their own questions.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry, you're breaking. As I said, my connection is not good. But yeah. So you forgive me if I can't get it. Okay, but go ahead. Sorry, Jenny. Go ahead.
I don't really want a follow-up question. I just want you to know how frustrated we all feel in this country, and many people all over Europe and America, that we are being stopped from criticizing Israel now. We can't even do that and get away with it, because there's always trouble. And may I say that individual political parties, including the Liberal Democrats, I see that somebody has already made this point about Liberal Democrats, tend to discourage people from making public statements about what's going on in Palestine. Israel has the most enormous power over us all. And I just don't know how we can break this. I really don't. And I just wonder if from the other side, if you can see a weak spot, apart from BDS, which I entirely agree with you, that is the one thing to do. But is there anything else we can do that will find that weak spot in Israel's armor?
Yeah, thank you, Jen. Of course, I really appreciate it, and this is very good because I will reply to my, BDS comrades here and activists about what you are saying. And I wrote to Andy and Anne-Marie that I've been to the UK. I visited in 2011 and 2013. Scotland and the UK, and I had a meeting. I visited the House of Commons, and I had a meeting with. I was invited by John McDonnell, and I had a meeting also with Jeremy Corbyn. And I must tell you that, to my surprise, most of the people I met in the UK were very supportive. Honestly, we're very, very supportive, and but also. I read all the letters and the articles, the Guardian, the Sunday Independent, the Sunday Times, etc., and letters written by the Israeli ambassador to the UK. And at the time, I could tell that there would be a campaign against the supporters of Palestine in the UK. One problem, to tell you the truth, I found especially with the reaction of the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, is that they were on the defensive. And I thought that they shouldn't be on the defensive, that they should go on the attack. Because look, as I said to you, we are very clear about what BDS is in terms of human rights, in terms of democracy, in terms of international law. And there is nothing to be defensive about. People who supported the struggle, the black South Africans were not on the defensive. If you remember, I don't know, of course I was not born at the time, when a handful of ANC activists had a meeting, I think it was 1958 or 1959, I'm not sure about either 58 or 59, had a meeting in London, and they decided to issue a calling on the international community to boycott the apartheid system until it complies with international law and puts an end to its racial, discrimination policy against the blacks of South Africa. Now, my point, and this is I think this answers your point, Jenny. The official world did not respond to that call at the time. It took the international community 30 years. 30 years, exactly 30 years, even more, to heed the call made by the oppressed of South Africans, all right? And this is why, the white supremacists of South Africa committed the Sharpeville massacre, 1961, committed the Soweto massacre, 1976, 1977, and you remember the township violence in the mid-80s. And I said, Thatcher and Reagan considered Nelson Mandela a terrorist. All right? The ANC was on the terrorist list as well. So the question that we raised, which is the same question that you are asking right now, what convinced the international community to change and start its sanctions, the military embargo, for example? It was a persistent struggle with civil society, convincing civil society to exert pressure on its government to boycott the apartheid system. This happened in the UK. As I said, Margaret Thatcher refused to do that at the beginning until the late 80s. The Americans with the formation of the Black Caucus, now we have Black Lives Matter. And we know very well that the left progressives of the Democratic Party in the United States played a role in the latest elections. And we understand that the tide is changing. Looking at the achievements that the BDS campaign has managed to accumulate over the last decade, I said, we issued our call in 2005 only. It took the international community 30 years to heed the call made by the South Africans. We know that this is our South African moment. I mean, it looks very, very dark. I mean, the things in Gaza, etc., but it is our moment. We have And I'm not sure whether I should go on or address another question. And if you allow me, I don't know.
Yeah, I just wanted to actually, it might be along with what you're going to address, I'm not sure, but I think Catherine Royce has a question for you around the elections in the US.
Yeah. Do you want to read that for me? Because there's so many questions here, and which one is that? Sorry. Does the Biden presidency offer any reason to hope for a solution? You know what, Catherine and everybody, it's a coincidence that my article, which is an answer to this question, came out today in Mondovez, if you know that.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's, you know, the presidential elections from Palestine. The answer is there, definitely. So you can go over the article on Mondovez today. It went out today, actually. So it answers. Does it give hope? I must tell you, you know, before you read the article, Biden's policy will be a continuation of Barack Obama's policy. Under Barack Obama, the largest amount of aid went to American aid, of course, went to $38 billion over the next 10 years. Biden is a supporter of apartheid Israel. Yeah, but you know, having said this, I said there are changes. There is a new generation that has helped, you know, Joe Biden to win the presidential election. We have Black Lives Matter. We have Jewish Voices for Peace, and Biden has to take that into consideration. And then, you know, all the other issues you, as I told you, they are in the article. We are running out of time, actually, and so I can't take one more question because of electricity. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I was thinking. I don't know if Andy wants to ask the final question as he's organised the meeting.
Well, that's very kind of you, Anne-Marie. Thank you again, Haigar, for giving such a very spirited talk to us, which I think has really interested a lot of us. And I think I'd just like to add to what you replied to Jenny Tong about what can be done about the way anti-Semitism is being used. I think that the answer doesn't lie with you, it lies with us. We've got to be much more, as you said, we've got to go be more less defensive and tackle this problem, because it is a problem. But the question I wanted to ask you was that you talk a lot about the one-state solution as being the only way out. And given the way, it's almost two questions. One is that, how do you think the Israeli people reconcile themselves to what they're doing to 2 million people right on their doorstep? And a kind of secondary question, in a one-state solution, everyone would have to learn to get along with each other. How do you see that happening?
Yeah, you know, you are breaking up, but I think I got the gist of your questions. Sorry if the first question, you know, about the Israeli people and how they, you know, manage with what they are doing to us, etc. And the second question is about the one-state solution. Yeah, you know, Andy, we have started a campaign. I don't know, it's a still new campaign. We've started it in 2008, called the One-State Campaign, calling for the establishment of a secular democratic state on the historic land of Palestine, a state for all of its citizens, regardless of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, etc., etc. And unfortunately, most Israelis supported the massacring of the Palestinians of Gaza. By the way, according to Haaretz, 70% of Israelis were disappointed last week or 2 weeks ago, actually, when Donald Trump lost the presidential elections. The public opinion in Israel is unfortunately moving towards, you know, right-wing, you know, fascist politics. But at the same time, if I take you back to the mid 80s, it could be, I think it was 1986 when the South African elections took place under apartheid. About 70% of white South Africans voted NP, National Party. All right, 1986, I think. So the question is, what happened in 1994? Because the same percentage which voted NP, which means pro-apartheid, separation, segregation, etc., voted against apartheid. Now that was the question. The same question, we are addressing the same question. How and what can we do? And in fact, the answer is very simple and direct. Resistance, popular resistance on the ground, but more importantly is BDS, when every single white South African felt orchestrated. Whenever they visited London, Melbourne, New York, etc., nobody wanted to deal with white South Africans, which forced the white bourgeoisie of South Africa to reconcile, find a way out. So I think this is what we're talking about here. We have BDS, and BDS, by the way, does not have a political program, no political vision. It's a rights-based movement. We are fighting for the implementation of United Nations Resolution 194 and, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, etc., etc. But with the One State campaign, we are offering a vision, a political vision, a win-win situation for everybody living in the historic land of Palestine, with the return of 6 to 7 million Palestinian refugees. So on the one hand, most Israelis, we do not exist actually in their Zionist consciousness. We are pushed to the back of what the American philosopher Frederick Jameson calls political unconscious. Like, the Americans, and how did Americans live with slavery, with the segregation in the American South, for example, all right? With civil resistance, Martin Luther King, struggle, accumulation of struggle, and then offering an alternative. The two-state solution is a racist solution par excellence. I mean, on the one hand, it is based on separating Palestinians, Muslims, and Christians. And by the way, some people don't know that we have Christians as well. Christians and Muslims, separating them from Israeli Jews based on religious identity. And what is that? I mean, how do you define that? How can you be liberal and support something like that? That's one. Number two, the two-state solution, in fact, does not address the right of Palestinian refugees and does not address the racist and apartheid nature of the state of Israel, which means if you have a Palestinian state next to Israel, which, by the way, which is impossible, because Israel has created new facts on the ground by annexing about 48% of the West Bank, with the existing settlements. A piece of information for everybody. When Israel signed the Oslo Accords in 1993, the number of Israeli settlers in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, notice, even in Gaza at the time, was 193,000, all right? Under the Labour Party, which signed the Oslo Accords, the number doubled and tripled. And now the number of Israeli settlers in the West Bank alone is between 700 and 800,000. That's it. You are talking about very hard, right-wing fascist, zealots who don't want to leave. And now you have the annexation plan, which I think is going to be implemented before Donald Trump leaves the White House. So in the ground, we have a one-state reality, but it's an apartheid state. And therefore, we need the international community again to intervene in order to create that crack in Zionist consciousness, exactly like what happened in South Africa.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marie.
Yes, I mean, I think we're probably running out of time, which is such a shame, because, if circumstances were different, we'd probably try and hang on to you for a lot longer. So I want to thank you very much. And I think all of us listening, I really can't find words to how to convey how we would like to support you. and we'll work to try and do so. I mean, I am just so in admiration of how you all keep the hope up, actually, considering what you go through and have gone through for so long. So thank you for sharing with us, and we are listening.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And we can have another meeting some other time in the future, hopefully.
That would be super. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.